After the initial celebrations and the big sigh of relief here in India that tariffs from America had been slashed from 50% to 18%, now come the specific questions that are still awaiting answers. How exactly was the India-US deal clinched? What led to Trump changing his mind? Was it the India deal with the European Union, which was called the mother of all deals, what prompted Trump to move, to change his mind? We simply do not know. What we know is this: Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal, in his statements on record about the negotiations, says that areas that are sensitive to India, agriculture and dairy, will remain protected. The deal is being hailed here in India as a big win for Modi. Many have even described it to be a shining moment for the Prime Minister. Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal said Modi personally finalized the last mile of the deal. The opposition here in India is targeting the government, however, and accusing it of compromising with the United States of America. Interestingly, Washington has claimed, Trump himself has claimed, that India has agreed to stop the purchase of Russian oil. Prime Minister Modi, in his comments, made no such reference, and the MEA has neither confirmed nor denied this. But the data does show that in the month of December, India's imports of Russian oil were down by 22% and down to their lowest level in 2 years. To talk about the economics, politics, and geopolitics, we'll be crossing over to two very distinguished guests from the United States in just a moment. I'm Barkha, you're with the Mojo story. On the program today, Foreign Minister Jaishankar has met with Marco Rubio. This after Trump and Modi made the big announcement that a trade deal between India and the United States was finally here. There are other experts who are saying that wait for the joint statement. We do not yet know what's in the deal. What we do know is that the two principals, Trump and Modi, have agreed on a wide range of issues, but the specifics, the fine print, are still awaited. The Americans have claimed that India has agreed to invest $500 billion in purchase of different US products over the next 5 years. The Americans have also claimed that India has agreed to stop the purchase of Russian oil, something that Delhi and the government have not commented on officially at all. We are now all awaiting a joint statement from both countries to look at the fine print, to look at the details. But already the politics and the geopolitics of this moment are very, very interesting. And to try and make sense of it all, let me introduce our two guests today, joining us, both of them from the United States of America. Chidanand Rajghata, author and columnist, senior journalist, is with us. Good to see you, Chidanand. And also joining us is Lisa Curtis, one of America's foremost strategic affairs minds, and also somebody who's had experience working with the Trump administration. She served in the Trump administration in his first term. Welcome to you both. Let me start by playing out the White House spokeswoman's statement, basically talking about the personal rapport between Trump and Modi. Did that really make a difference in the end? We'll discuss that in a moment. Take a look.
Well, I have the great honor and pleasure of seeing President Trump interact with leaders all around the world. When it comes to Prime Minister Modi, I know he particularly enjoys their relationship and has a deep respect for the Prime Minister and for his country of India. They had a great call. It was very productive yesterday, and they struck a deal in which India has agreed to stop purchasing Russian oil, to buy more American oil from the United States of America, and potentially from Venezuela, too. As you know, the president and his national security team are now dictating the commerce of Venezuela and those oil sales. So this directly benefits the American people as well. And in addition, India has agreed to invest more in the United States because of President Trump's call to action on that phone call yesterday. Prime Minister Modi committed to $500 billion of purchases of U.S. energy, transportation, agricultural products, and the U.S. tariff on India will now be at 18%, but American exports to India will face a tariff of 0%. So this is a great deal and a huge win for American workers, businesses, and consumers alike.
Again, it's important to say that none of those claims have been specifically confirmed by the government here in India. Lisa Curtis, let me bring you in. I'm sure that this is a moment of thaw or reconciliation that both countries and people like yourselves who've worked on this relationship would be relieved at. That said, what do you think led to it? How did this rapprochement take place according to you?
Well, thanks, Barkha. It's great to be back with you. I think that, look, this is a very good news, long time coming. This is an opportunity to get the very important strategic relationship between the United States and India back on track. What led to it, I think, we'll learn more in the coming days, hopefully, about what actually happened behind the scenes. But I can think of, probably three reasons why the deal was clinched now. The first relates to Ambassador Sergio Gore taking up his post in India. He has been there since January 9th. He's been making very positive statements about the relationship, talking about the trade negotiations moving in a positive direction. So I think we can surmise that he has at least played some role in getting this deal across the finish line. The second is probably related to the clinching of the India-EU free trade agreement last week, because I think that gave India some leverage. It shows that India has options. It shows that there are other markets that India can export its goods to. So I think that probably had something to do with the United States feeling a little more urgency to completing its deal with India. And then third, I think you mentioned it. It's the reduction in Indian oil imports from Russia. This is something that we know was very important to President Trump. He had consistently raised this issue, and it was important for him to get that commitment that India would halt altogether its imports of Russian oil. Now, I know that has not been confirmed by Prime Minister Modi, but I think, that seems to have been a very important thing for President Trump. So I think we have to assume that this was discussed in the call and there was some kind of commitment provided to the United States. So those are some of the things that I think could be behind how the deal was finally clinched.
Before I take that to Chidanand, just one follow-up question for you. In this period of tension, we had a number of American experts, even officials in the Trump administration, who would go on saying, look, Modi should pick up the phone and call Trump. Modi should pick up the phone and call Trump. Now, how much of a personal dimension has there been to this moment? Once again, the personal dimension did not prevent both countries from nosediving and plummeting when that had to happen. So, I would be mindful of sort of looking at diplomacy through the lens of personal rapport. In the end, it's each country for their own interests, and that we understand. But do you believe that this could have happened without the two principals being, on the same page? Did they have to do the heavy lifting in the last mile, according to you?
Well, I think ultimately, yes, President Trump had to sign off on the deal. That's clear, because what we knew in the last summer is that there was a deal and that the USTR, head of USTR, Jamieson Greer, as well as the U.S. Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, both thought it was a good deal and should have been signed then. But President Trump refrained from doing so. And, we can talk about the reasons perhaps behind that. I think there were also several, but yeah, it's clear that President Trump himself had to agree that, yes, this deal is good for the United States. It's something we should move forward on. So I think the personal relationship is important, at least for President Trump. He does like to feel that, he has a close personal tie to the leader. He has a lot of respect for Prime Minister Modi. He knows, he's been leading this great country of India for many years now. So he does have a lot of respect for him as a global leader. But I do think that there was a breach in that trust between the two leaders over the aftermath of the India-Pakistan dispute. And President Trump just could not understand why India could not give him credit for the ceasefire. And, I think it's quite clear India's position. India's always been against mediation, and Prime Minister Modi would have taken a political hit if he would have, nominated Trump for a Nobel Peace Prize, or even, gave him credit for the ceasefire. So that was just something that both leaders had to move past. So hopefully they have moved past that very difficult moment in the relationship, because that really was at the heart of the breach in their sort of personal rapport and personal relationship. But that seems to have gotten back on track. And so this is a very positive step. And hopefully the two sides now can move forward with the plethora of issues that, they have been working on for the last 2 decades.
So, Chidanand, let's bring you in. At this point, the headlines dominating the US media news cycle are, of course, the Epstein files. Trump got very angry with the CNN anchor when she tried to question him about it. Caitlin Collins getting a piece of his mind there. I'm imagining the India-US deal not really the top of the news cycle in the US, but very much the top of the news cycle here. Also accompanied by its own share of domestic politics. Rahul Gandhi, the opposition, accusing the prime minister of having compromised BJP voters, obviously saying something very different and feeling like this is a very big hurrah moment for Modi. The fact is, we don't know the facts. There's a lot of detail we don't know. And I think Lisa is right that you may never get anybody to come forth and say, yeah, the Americans told us who to buy or not buy oil from, and we just said yes. But there is data. And the data does show you a 22% drop from November to December of 2025 in the purchase of Russian oil to its lowest ever level in 2 years. This is, analysis done by Reuters. What do you make of what clinched it? Do you agree with Lisa's analysis? Do you have theories of your own?
Yeah, thank you, Barkha, for having me. Yes, I agree with the 2 or 3 points that Lisa mentioned. The EU free trade agreement was definitely a factor. The point here is President Trump and many of his cabinet associates had said things like, President Trump himself had said India is a dead economy, it'll be a dead economy, remember that? And then you had Howard Lutnick who said India will say sorry, they'll come begging. And none of this happened, actually. If you really look at it, I think India's approach and response was very measured, very patient. This was a country which actually wore the US down. And in addition to India-EU trade deal, I believe the other factors were also the movement on the BRICS front, where India, Brazil, China moved to an alternate, to setting up an alternate payment system, circumventing SWIFT. I think that's a major consideration. There are definite indications that there's a de-dollarization underway. It may take some time. So India was pretty unbending. There was also this factor of tariffs. At the end of the day, the tariffs hurt American people. This whole idea that somehow, tariffs is bringing in billions and billions of dollars or trillions of dollars, like he claims, it's only partially true. Yes, there's, the US is collecting 50 billion in tariff revenue every month, but guess what? That tariff revenue is being paid by the American consumer, the American importer who passes it on to the American consumer. So that was a major factor because you're starting to feel the bite now. And there were many exceptions carved out. For instance, Brazil, which has 50% tariffs, but their main export, coffee, was exempted because, hey, the Americans can't do without, their morning, Starbucks cup. So there were several factors, but definitely the EU trade deal, the fact that India did not keel over and die, despite everything, it was very instructive. So there were 5 towns in India, cities that I monitored, to affect tariffs. For instance, Tirupur in Tamil Nadu, which is big textiles, 25% of all Indian textiles, mostly directed towards United States. Bhimavaram and Nellore in Andhra Pradesh, which is big shrimp sector. Surat for diamonds, jewelry. Ludhiana, Amritsar, for basmati rice. Guess what? these towns suffered, but there was not the mass employment. Nobody, threw themselves out, from buildings or threw themselves on railway tracks. The towns survived. And in fact, Indian exporters, thanks to the sanctions, went out and sought other markets and found other markets. There was more export of basmati to the Gulf, to, more export of textiles, shrimp. For the first time, we exported shrimp to China and Japan, right? So there was incredible resilience on part of India. And I think US eventually realized that it's futile, that you're basically, blocking out the market, and the ones who are suffering at the end of the day was the American consumer.
You spoke about India sort of being very patient, and actually how India wore the US down. Bloomberg has some reporting in the last few hours that is talking about how Ajit Doval made, they say, an as yet unreported visit to America, where he met with Rubio. And he conveyed to Rubio that India was willing to wait out. India was willing to wait out Trump's term. Now, of course, as you said, there is an economic hit, but the exporters weren't keeling over. I'm not sure what 3 more years of this may have done. I don't want to gloss over the fact that there were real economic consequences eventually to those 50% tariffs. But this is another interesting piece of information that's coming out of Doval's role as reported by Bloomberg.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there were several interlocutors. For instance, everyone's now focused on External Affairs Minister Jaishankar's meeting with Marco Rubio, but he also met Scott Bessent, who's the Treasury Secretary, yesterday. So there's obviously more going on. Like I said, the US is seriously concerned about de-dollarization. President Trump has been very open. He has actually said, if the BRICS countries, go on this de-dollarization, spree, we are going to sanction them and so on. So there are a lot of moving parts, but I do believe there's a combination of factors, and the US, I think, realized the futility of, these tariffs. And look, at the end of the day, particularly with regards to Russian oil, the fact is India is the second largest consumer of oil, and it places its oil bets very carefully. It's not just Russia giving cheap oil. India also buys from Saudi Arabia, from Iraq, it's bought in previously from Venezuela, from Nigeria, from UAE, gas from Qatar. And what basically happens is it's not a straight trade-off. You have to keep various, countries and people happy and give them the Indian market. One of the reasons India has had excellent relations with Gulf countries recently is you're keeping the sheikhs happy. You're buying from so many of them, and that's how India has outmaneuvered Pakistan. So the Indian, just as President Trump uses the American market as bait, India uses its oil buying power as a weapon to.
I think everyone's waiting to see what actually happens sector-wise, and we don't have those details yet. But I do want to play out Piyush Goyal's statement, asserting that agriculture and dairy have remained protected. This is in contrast to some statements that are coming out of the United States, on how certain sectors which aren't sensitive may get even zero tariff. It may go from, may have sort of no tariff access or free access totally. So we just don't know. But let's play out this statement by Piyush Goyal.
प्रधानमंत्री माननीय श्री नरेंद्र मोदी जी की फरवरी 2025 में अमेरिका यात्रा के बाद से भारत और अमेरिका एक संतुलित और पारस्परिक रूप से लाभकारी द्विपक्षीय व्यापार समझौते का संपन्न करने के उद्देश्य से नियमित रूप से चर्चा करते रहे हैं। इसी को ध्यान में रखते हुए दोनों पक्षों के वार्ताकारों ने पिछले 1 वर्ष में विभिन्न स्तरों पर गहन बातचीत की है। दोनों पक्षों के महत्वपूर्ण और विविध हितों को देखते हुए यह स्वाभाविक है कि दोनों पक्ष अपनी अपनी अर्थव्यवस्थाओं के महत्वपूर्ण और संवेदनशील क्षेत्रों की रक्षा करते हुए सर्वोत्तम संभव परिणाम सुनिश्चित करना चाहेंगे। इन वार्ताओं के दौरान भारतीय पक्ष अपने संवेदनशील क्षेत्रों, विशेषकर कृषि और दुग्ध क्षेत्रों के हितों की रक्षा सुनिश्चित करने में सफल रहा है।
Well, towards the end, Lisa, he said that India has been successful in protecting the sensitive areas of agriculture and dairy. I want to bring up the fact that we're seeing a number of very specific claims being made by U.S. officials. In fact, as I was mentioning to Chidanand, one of those claims is that India's industrial goods tariff will go from 13.5% to 0%. We do not have these details from India, from the government at all yet. It has been just a more sort of generalized announcement of the deal. There are those who are saying this is an announcement and not an agreement yet. Do you believe there's merit in that distinction? Do you believe that, the relief and the jubilation, maybe we should wait a bit to see the fine print? Or are you concerned that the rockiest areas would have been sorted out?
I'm pretty confident that this is a real agreement. And as Jameson Greer, USTR, said yesterday, that they're working on papering the agreement, meaning that, the outlines of the agreement are there. They know what they're dealing with. They just need to get it on paper because, these negotiations have been going on for so long. And in fact, we were hearing, back in July, there was an agreement. So I think that the agreement is probably largely the same as it was back in July. But maybe India's reduction in oil imports from Russia and some other factors have finally, allowed President Trump to be able to, agree that it could be signed. And with regard to, India lowering its tariffs, I think, certainly that has had to happen on some items. Otherwise, we wouldn't have an agreement. So there had to be some compromise on the Indian side. However, I don't think that was on agriculture or dairy. I think, the Commerce Minister is correct in saying that, Prime Minister Modi protected the agriculture industry, and that's not surprising. He had consistently said that he was not going to sacrifice their interests. It's just too important of a political constituency for him. He could not afford for his own power to be able to make those kinds of concessions. So I think that was something the U.S. side had to learn and digest. And I think most U.S. officials had, but President Trump was the one that had to be convinced that India is not going to be able to allow U.S. farmers into the Indian market, perhaps as President Trump has initially hoped. So I think there were compromises on both sides, and both sides are spinning the agreement in their own way. The U.S., Carolyn Lovett just said that, India's agreed to go to zero on all U.S. exports. Not really true, I don't think. But also Prime Minister Modi is avoiding the issue of what he committed to on importing Russian oil. So I think that speaks volumes, his own silence on that. So clearly both sides want this agreement to work, and they're willing to allow each other to kind of spin it for their own political audiences.
Chidanand, to some degree, that's natural. That's politics. But I want to pick up a comment from one of our members in the live stream. This was never about Russian oil financing the Ukraine war. It was always about buying oil from the US. And the trade deal has done nothing to allay India's fear of a G2 world, America and China, or the death of the Quad. So we're getting straight into, before we get into the geopolitics, this 500 billion figure, and I think you've spoken about it on our shows before. It's important to Trump to be able to put a big number out there. And he's taken this big number and he's put it out there. And again, we here in India, we don't have the breakdown, the fine print of what that $500 billion actually translates into.
Absolutely. I said it before. He loves big round numbers. It's 500 billion, 600 billion, 11 trillion, 20 trillion, and so on. It's never 475 billion or 265 billion. It's always, big round numbers. And yeah, look, so there's a lot of, posturing on both sides. But the fact is, I think we have the broad contours of an agreement. And even specifics, agriculture, for instance, this whole thing of, oh my God, we have to protect our agriculture. There are actually certain sectors where we need agricultural produce. Do you know we import? India produces vast amounts of lentils and pulses, but we still import because there's some years where we are short, and the government imports. We buy masoor dal from Canada, we buy arhar dal from Australia. So there are specific sectors. I actually call it a protein exchange. We need a protein bill. India is a protein deficient country and a carb excess country, right? So by all means, we can buy a ton of American protein that includes, tree nuts, for instance. We're already buying $1 billion worth of pistachios and almonds. California almonds are all over Delhi. You can probably add walnuts to it. And we need dal. We need dal, which we buy from Australia. We buy dal from Canada, from Mozambique, from Tanzania. So there's plenty of scope for agricultural imports. And for those who are into non-veg, the US has been trying to sell chicken legs for the longest time. So there's a ton of chicken legs you can buy. So absolutely, I think we need to protect basic agriculture, which means not buying, wheat or rice. We're self-sufficient in that. We in fact export that. I'm saying, yes, let's export carbs and import protein. That's what we need. And really speaking, I don't think we should be spooked by zero tariff, because why would you want to tariff, goods which help the Indian people, right? I see medical equipment in the list where, US is going to export. Yeah, sure. We need MRI machines. I mean, there's only one Indian company which has just started making MRI machines. We need MRI machines, CAT scan. These are things which we need to import at zero, tariff. Very good.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm not spooked by, oh my God, India has zero tariffs, and the US is imposing 18% tariff. Yeah, US is importing 18% tariff, which is hurting the American consumer. Right. And I went granular on this. I told you that the bag of 10-pound bag of basmati rice, which used to be $14.99, $16.99, is now $24.99. The company which is exporting basmati, they are not paying it. They are not paying the tariffs. It's the American importer paying it and billing me, right? I'm paying $24.99. So I think that we need to understand trade is complex, but by and large, I think this is a win-win for both sides. And I think India came out well out of this episode. They were very patient. They were very measured. I think we got the best deal. Yeah, sure, you can romanticize and say, oh, we used to have 2 and 4% tariffs, but that world is gone, right? This is a new world, and if it's the American president insists that the whole world has to pay taxes to access the American market, so be it. It's the American importer. Again, let me emphasize, it's the American importer and the American consumer who is paying the tariffs, right?
Yeah.
Tariff is important to us only in the sense that we need to access the American market, and the fact that we have 18% tariff on your basmati or whatever, places you on level with Pakistan, which has 19% tariffs. At least we don't get outgunned on some of these fronts by neighboring countries. It's a equal.
So in the end, let me come to the geopolitics. I'll start with you, Lisa. We have the backdrop of Mark Carney's speech at Davos. We have unprecedented sort of friction between Canada and the United States, and Carney is coming to India in the next few weeks. We have Carney's emphasis on sort of the middle powers, how the middle powers need to do something. And while the relationship seems back on track, there is some sort of apprehension that you can't lean in too much any longer toward Washington. There has also been concern about Pakistan and the relationship between Islamabad and Washington, and hence the Pakistan tariff 19%, India 18%. That may seem symbolic, but it matters. And it does matter that Trump will make references like Asim Munir is my favorite field marshal and so on. If you were to look at the lens of the relationship through geopolitics, what do you see?
Well, even though this is a great moment, the conclusion of the trade deal, we should not forget that it wasn't only trade tensions which led to the sort of crisis in the India-US relationship over the last 10 months. We need to remember that a major part of that crisis was over the India-Pakistan dispute and how the United States handled the aftermath of the conflict. And the fact that President Trump invited Asim Munir into the Oval Office just weeks after the April 22nd terrorist attack in India, that of course India accuses Pakistan of sponsoring. So there was a huge breakdown over this issue. And unless the United States, unless President Trump will back away from this idea that, his government is going to try to mediate between India and Pakistan, I think there's going to be trouble. This is a red line for India. And I think President Trump is going to have to recognize that. He hasn't talked about mediation in a long time, so maybe he has learned to sort of stay away from that issue. But I think that is a risk that's there. So the way the United States manages its relationship with Pakistan will have an impact on the U.S.-India relationship. And I think, one of the red flags here is the fact that the U.S. ambassador to India is dual-hatted, also has this role as envoy to South and Central Asia. I don't know how that's going to work out. Look, being ambassador to India is a full-time job. And this is a major, important relationship for the United States. So it's difficult for me to imagine that he's going to have the bandwidth to be able to manage the entire region, or if he's going to be flying to different capitals in Central Asia, in Pakistan, while he's trying to serve as the envoy to India. So I think, we still have some potentially treacherous waters ahead. And I think India is going to be very cautious, even though they're, glad to have this trade agreement. They're going to remember the, unpredictable, erratic approach that Trump took to the relationship. It was almost as if the U.S. was willing to blow up 25 years of careful strategic investment in the relationship. So I don't think that's going to be easily forgotten. I think India will be a bit cautious in its approach. But, at the same time, what we've seen over the last 10 months is that, the interagency, different parts of the bureaucracy that have been invested in this relationship did carry on with their initiatives. Let's not forget, we did have the signing of the 10-year Defense Framework Agreement by Defense Secretary Hegseth and the Indian Defense Minister. We had continued, large-scale investment from U.S. firms in India's AI infrastructure. So the technology cooperation will continue. External Affairs Minister Jaishankar is here in the United States to attend the Critical Minerals Conference. So it's clear there's going to be more cooperation when it comes to critical minerals, because India and the United States share an interest in diversifying those critical mineral supply chains, not relying on China. So there are still, a lot of fundamentals that will draw the U.S. and India together, China being the main one. And there is a lot of prior investment in the relationship to build on. But all of that said, I do think that India will be a bit cautious in how it approaches its relationship with the United States. And I don't think we're going to, wake up tomorrow and see that the relationship has gone back to the heights that it was at, say, when, at the beginning of this administration. I think, we all expected that the U.S.-India relationship was going to, go very smoothly based on how President Trump had approached India in his first term. So I don't think we're going to go back to that the heights of the relationship that we thought we were seeing at the beginning of the Trump administration, that we definitely saw at the end of the first Trump administration. That's not going to happen overnight. I think it's going to take time to restore the trust that's been lost.
So, Chidanand, let me give you the closing word. I think that's a very useful reminder from Lisa that this is not a tariff war by itself, and that actually the friction began during the last day of Operation Sindoor, and therefore how Trump sort of handles India, Pakistan, and whether he hyphenates or doesn't hyphenate, whether he seems soft on Munir and the Sharif administration, is going to matter to India, and India is going to be wary.
Yeah, also China, right? So yeah, look, I totally agree with Lisa. The biggest casualty in this whole episode is trust, right? And you can't put a value on that. It's incalculable. The fact that it took so long, almost 50 years from, I go back to the 1970s, when we had issues with trust in the post, during the Nixon era and post-Nixon era. It took a long time to repair all that. And the fact that it was so easily damaged, with, to put it kindly, a very mercurial approach. I mean, it's one thing to, call Ted Cruz lying Ted and little Marco and stuff like that, and they all come, back to him. It's another thing to, denigrate a country, to say things like you're a dead economy, you're toast without us, and so on. So that's not going to be, easily forgotten. I think it'll take a long time to heal this. And let's be honest, in many ways, India, rest of the world is, just waiting for the next 3 years, into the next presidency. So, yeah, I mean, I just feel that this was unnecessary. It could have been done without all this drama. I entirely understand the motivation of the United States to maintain its primacy or regain its primacy, to protect its market, to generate jobs. The whole MAGA agenda, at least on the economic front, is perfectly understandable. But to do so with so much grandstanding and so much volatility, I think that served the United States not very well. We're now seeing a gradual reset. I think after the initial fever of tariffs, when you went on a tear against all countries, you saw over a period of time, I mentioned Brazil and coffee, there were many carve-outs made for other countries, including India. For instance, electronic exports, we didn't have tariffs. So yeah, the repair job is underway. And I think, once again, let me emphasize, I think India played its cards very well. It navigated a very difficult situation with, patience, with resilience. And credit also redounds to the Indian people. Look, I mentioned, these towns. The great thing about India and Indian people and Indian cities, towns, is the resilience. The fact that, things didn't go completely haywire with, mass unemployment. And with resilience, not only does resilience mean, one implication is we are a long-suffering people, but what you saw actually during the last 6 months is also enterprise. And I repeat again, there were Indian industries which were affected, which went looking for other markets, right? Which just didn't keel over. So there was a sense of calm. Did it hurt? Sure, it hurt. But I think in general, there was a sense of calm, and it helped the government negotiate from a position not of strength, but at least there was no panic. And eventually, I think it was the U.S. which gave way, and the U.S. gained too. Okay, I mean, I think it's a win-win for both sides. But like you said right at the beginning, there's a lot more, to use Jameson Greer's words, a lot more papering to be done. And that's always the case. So we shouldn't celebrate prematurely. I also said this with regards to the EU-India deal. It'll take at least 2 years for the European Parliament, to actually pass and ratify the deal. So we shouldn't be jubilant. But yeah, I mean, I think the turnaround has begun, and it, I think, shows in the Indian markets talking
Yeah,
about.
I think somebody said yesterday, take the win, but don't do a victory lap. And I think that would be
Absolutely.
maybe a good cautious way to put it. The Prime Minister is expected to speak in Parliament here, and also that joint statement should tell us a lot more. And that could lead to a whole new round of questions. But I think, as both of you have said, the basic contours of this agreement are very much on the table, and I think that is a relief for both administrations. And I think for people of both countries who have been quite gobsmacked, in particular the Indian American diaspora, by this sort of phase of extreme friction. Thank you very much to Chidanand Rajkhatta and to Lisa Curtis. It's always a pleasure to learn from your insights, and we hope to talk to both of you again very soon. Thank you, and see you soon. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.